Hey guys, my name is Manica. Welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So, continuing off of our last video, we're going to learn a bit more about this synthesizer and how to mess around in it. So, this is the default preset rather. I reset it, and what we're going to talk about today is these tools, and we're also going to briefly touch on the envelopes, just because the envelopes are something we kind of already touched on, and it's pretty intuitive, works pretty much the same way. So what we have here, we're going to start off with, is I kind of briefly mentioned it. These are volume. You do not have volume for the first oscillator, but you have volume for the next two. So you could mess around with those and use those however you do so wish. And for this one here, these two are actually pretty simple. It's pitch. So if you have a note that you play, pretty simple. Now, one of the things to remember is if we have it here, it's at the default pitch basically. And if we do it right here at 12, it's at an octave lower, it's called. If you don't know what an octave is, don't worry, we'll deal with that later. And if you set it to 0, it's 2 octaves lower. So basically what this means is if you have it at these different spots, you'll be hitting the same note, just a deeper version of it. So it sounds like the same note, is just kind of lower. And same deal, you can pitch it up as well. So this one, what it does is it's a fine-tuning adjustment, you can tell here. So it's a lot more subtle, and when you bring it all the way up here, you'll notice it's the same as bringing it up one here. So what we could do is we could set it somewhere in between if we do so wish. Like we want to have a sort of different sound instead of having it perfectly on pitch. We could pitch it off just a little bit. And this right here, the final thing in this little section, is the pan. And that's pretty self-explanatory. So, you can mess around with these ones, and they'll give you enough flexibility to where you can make an interesting sound. One of my favorite things about synthesizers is their detunes. And what detune does is we'll set it to a square here, and then if you watch, or listen rather, it starts to sound like it's wobbling. So what that allows us to do is when we stack things, instead of sounding exactly the same, so if we turn these all to the exact same settings, what'll happen is we'll get a rather plain, boring, dull sound that we don't really want. So these are all the exact same settings. Just sounds like if I would have done this. Exactly the same. Now, if I take the detune on these and turn it like this and like that, we get this pretty cool sound. And if we play a chord with it, actually we'll switch this to saws, because that's what this is pretty much the super saw sound that you're used to. So it's a very characteristic sound that's heard all over the place. Normally it's done with other synthesizers because this one's not good for designing super saws, but you can do it here, just kind of proof to show. So that's basically all the tools. Phase offset I am not going to talk about because it's pretty complex in terms of what it does and how it does it. Suffice it to say, it's kind of like a mix between, it's kind of like detune, except for a lot different. So one of the things I could just kind of to illustrate it, if we have a saw here and we change the detune, the sound changes. But if we change the phase, the sound stays exactly the same. Now, when it starts to make a difference when you get similar to this this phase invert. This is basically just like an offset that does a similar thing. So if we get all these sounds, turn them up here, set them to different waveforms. We'll set that one to a square and this one to a triangle. It changes the sound. So that one, you can mess around with it, but I'm not going to explain what it really does because it's a little too technical to fit in this video here. So now we have covered pretty much everything around here. Now, phase random is something you may want to mess with sometimes. And what that allows you to do is it'll just kind of change the tone each time you press a button. So you kind of saw what we were doing with the phase here. If I do phase random and turn that all the way up, what'll happen is the sound kind of changes every single time you press the button because it just messes with the phase each time you press a key. So so that's a little fun, but you may or may not use that. Okay, so now without further ado, we'll get into envelopes. Now, hopefully you guys remember envelopes. I'm just going to show you. It's the exact same thing here. We have a volume envelope. Exactly the same as what we were messing with before. Actually, let me change this to a super saw. There we go. And then we'll do that. This one, yeah, we'll pitch that one lower. There we go. So it'll sound like this. And what we could do is, wrong tab, we could mess around with this exactly the same way we were doing before. Nothing too new here, and pretty much the same stuff we learned. But one of the things that you'll find more interesting, perhaps, is if we turn the sustain all the way up, we have same as before, but we can mess with the filter here and do some pretty interesting things. So let's just take a listen. So it kind of sounds like it's fading in and out, but if I change this to this, you probably recognize that as a sound that you hear in a lot of tracks, or you hear when DJs are doing sets. This is a filter, and I'll explain more about what these really are, but realize that low pass is probably what you're going to use most of the time. So it's fast low pass, low pass, low pass X2, SVF low pass X2, SVF low pass, whatever. So low pass is what you're going to use most of the time. There are some other ones, and we'll talk about those. But that's not so much of an issue here. So you could modulate these filters by going to the mod X, because if you notice here, this one is mod X, and this is the frequency. Look at the tooltip window when in doubt. So this is filter frequency. This one is actually the bandwidth. Bandwidth we're not going to talk about at all right now. So we're just going to worry about modulating the X here. So we'll turn on the envelope, turn up the amount, and then we'll start doing some interesting things. So have a fast attack, no hold, fast decay, no sustain. And what do we get? We get this sort of sound, if I do it right. So one of the things is the envelope here right now, it's actually bringing the amount up. We already have the filter all the way up, so it won't do anything. So if I turn it all the way down, now the filter will bring it up, so it'll sound like this. So you may or may not recognize that sound. We could do something, have a slower attack here, and yeah, we'll do something like this. Not too slow though. We do it like and turn the sustain up. Why not? And if we go back to the volume, we could release quite a bit, and then turn up the release on this as well, and it'll sound like this. So that's, you could kind of see where I'm going with this. You could do a lot of different things with it, and it's just kind of limited by your imagination. So you could do tons of fun things, and like we already talked about with pitch, you could do fun things with pitch as well, and you could even use LFOs to kind of give it a wobble. So we'll do that here just because it's fun to mess with. So we'll turn up the amount, and then we'll do this. We'll have the attack really fast, and the speed, make it fast. So you saw with this pretty simple synthesizer, we could do a whole bunch of things. Now, the best part about all this, if you go into something like SAR, you'll find out that actually it's a lot of the same things here. We have our level here, And this is just going to be our attack, decay, sustain, and release. And then we have our pitch here, which is this is our transposing, which is our coarse tuning. This is our fine tuning. This is something that we haven't covered yet. We'll talk about that in probably the next video here, because I don't want this to go too long, and I want to still talk a little bit more about synthesizers. And then we have unison voices, which we can't talk about quite yet. And then we'll talk about, we talked about detune and panning, and we have the LFO here. And the destination is just, where is it mapped to? Is it mapped to the cutoff, sync? By the way, the cutoff is the filter cutoff, which is, oh, what do you know? The filter right there. We have the envelope, and we have the mode of the filter, and just a whole bunch of things that are basically reruns. And level, phase, we talked about phase, and we talked about detune, we talked about the octaves again. So a lot of it is just repetition. And even if we go to something like Toxic Biohazard, where it's insanely complicated, you'll find that you could break it down to a lot of the same things. We have the filter, attack, decay, sustain, and release. We have the envelopes for our volumes here. So we have the velocity. This is how hard you hit the note affects the volume. So the lighter I hit the note, the less the less the volume is. Then we have attack, decay, sustain, and release. And we have the pitch as well. We have detune. You'll notice a lot of this stuff repeats itself. So what you get with different synthesizers is mostly just different tone or some sort of unique feature. Like this one has frequency modulating, which I cannot talk about because I do not know anything about how it works really. But you'll find, like I said, it's all just about, you know, each synthesizer having some sort of unique aspect that that causes it to be the one that you choose for a particular thing. So it seems pretty complicated when you first open some of these, but then you could break them down to pretty simple sections. So that's it for this video. I'm going to do one more video on this just to talk about a few more things, and we're going to have fun with that. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.